Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah. So, welcome to the first tutorial for the course of Forests and Their Management, which is offered by Dr. Ankur Awadhiya. And so, for this tutorial, I will give you a brief recap of what happened during this week, and after that, we'll have a quiz, a short quiz with some questions, and after that, or anywhere you have a doubt, you can stop me and you can ask me any doubts that you have during this session. Okay, so let's get started. So, in the first lecture, we basically discussed what is a forest. So, what do you guys think of when a forest, when somebody talks about a forest? Like, what picture comes to your brain? Anyone? You can type it out in the chat box, or you can just unmute and say, like, what is an image that comes to your brain when you think about a forest? Okay. Okay, cool. So, in this lecture, mostly what they talked about was they defined forests in various different ways, how the dictionary defines the forest, what is the origin of the word or the etymology of forest, what are some ecological, technical, and legal definitions of this term. And there was one thing to note down or to keep in mind is that a land might be a forest in one particular definition and might not be defined as a forest in some other definition. So it all depends on the context in which we're talking about a forest. So, first of all, if you Google forest and a dictionary definition, what it shows is that it's a large area which is chiefly covered with trees and with some undergrowth. And something to keep in mind here is, as mentioned in the lecture, large area does not really specify how large an area is important to be for it to be classified as a forest. So this is one thing that is missing in the dictionary definition. And another thing, it says chiefly covered with trees and undergrowth, which means that even if the vegetation is not necessarily trees or undergrowth, it can be classified as a forest based on what kind of vegetation is there. There can be different types of forests, right? And when we come to the etymology of the term forest, or where does the term come from, it comes from the Latin term foris, which means outside. And when you add silva to this, silva is another Latin term which means wood. So forestis silva together means wood that is outside. Outside of what? It could be outside your house, it could be outside city limits, outside um, like your neighborhood limits, anything based in that. So basically, in this definition, it means anything, any wood that is outside the particular area that we're talking about. So uh, we now come to the ecological definition, which is a more scientific way of describing a forest. And so,
Like, yeah.
according to the ecological definition, a forest is more or less defined by saying that it's basically a plant community which comprises of trees and other plants and is usually supposed to have a closed canopy. So, according to this definition, if there's an area which has trees and other plants but does not have a closed canopy, um it would not fall under the definition of a forest according to ecology. But ecologically speaking, other things, for example, if there are shrubs or if there are grasses, it can come under a shrubland or a grassland accordingly. So in ecology, there's even more definitions for these different forms of landscapes, these different forms of ecosystems. So there are certain specific words that are used for different sorts of vegetation covering a landscape. But a forest is only described if the canopy is closed and if there's trees and other plants. Then there's come a technical or a utilitarian definition, according to which basically what like is the use of that area. So it's defined in two different forms. It's basically an area which can be set aside either for producing timber or other non-timber forest produce. And again, this now could be an area which is either within the city limits or it can be area which is outside the city limits. It does not, this definition does not mention that the area is necessarily supposed to be outside any limits, but it's just an area which is set aside for production of timber or other forest produce. Or it could be an area which is maintained for its indirect benefits. For example, for the benefits that it provides by climate regulation, because in forests, since we know there are trees, it regulates the climate, keeps the temperature low, increases the amount of rainfall, it helps in maintaining the water regime, as works as a watershed, or other protective functions that the forest might have. For example, it protects us by clearing up the air, and reducing say pollution in that particular area. Or if it's like a mangrove next to a sea, then it protects the coastal areas from certain like tsunamis or typhoons that might come across in the ocean. So this is a technical definition in which we are mostly talking about how useful is that particular area to us. And then there's a legal definition, which how you legally define a forest, which will come in handy if somebody is, say, filing a case in the court for something specific, or filing a case about trespassing, or filing a case about somebody illegally cutting trees or collecting forest produce. Then you need to provide a legal definition of the forest. And here it's basically very simple. It's an area of land which is proclaimed to be a forest under the forest law. So, if that area has been classified as a forest under the forest law, it's basically a forest. Then comes the Food and Agricultural Organization definition. So, how the FAO defines the forest, which is a more broader definition. It basically has different parts to it. It says that any land or all lands that bear vegetative associations and they're dominated by trees of any size, whether they are exploited or not does not matter, but if they are dominated by trees and if they are capable of producing wood, or of influencing the climate or the water regime, or of providing shelter to livestock and wildlife. So there are basically three different parts to this definition. One is that they should be dominated by trees, whether they are exploited or not that does not matter, but they should be capable of producing wood. Second is that they should be capable of influencing the climate or the water regime. And the third is that they should be providing shelter to the livestock, right? So these are three parts of the FAO definition, which you should keep in mind if this definition arises or the question arises. So we discussed different ways of defining a forest. According to the dictionary, it's basically just any land with trees, and according to the etymology, it basically comes from Latin words forestus and silva. According to the ecological definition, it's supposed to have trees and supposed to have a closed canopy. According to the technical definition, it can be an area which is used to grow timber, or it can be an area which has a indirect use, for example, a protective or a climatic role to play. Legally, it's an area which is proclaimed as a forest. And according to the FAO, we just discussed, it's any area which is capable of producing wood and affecting the climate or providing shelter. Then there comes the Supreme Court definition of forest in India. So, Supreme Court basically defines the forest based on the Govardhan case. And according to it, the word forest should be used according to its dictionary meaning. And the description covers all the recognized forests, whether they are reserved, protected, or otherwise, for the purpose of Section 2O in the Forest Conservation Act. So basically, again, the Supreme Court is following the dictionary meaning of the forest, but forest is different from forest land, and there's a minute difference between these two things. In forest land, it does not only include forests as understood in the dictionary sense, but any area that was recorded as a forest in the government records, whether or not they are currently covered with trees or not, that does not matter. But if it was described as a forest in the government record, then it's basically forest land. And government record includes the following documents. It could be a revenue forest based under the Revenue Department, could be a reserved or a protected forest under the Indian Forest Act, could be a village forest, or could be a private forest which is owned by uh, which is owned by a particular individual, comes under private ownership, which is only possible in certain states of India. Then comes the question how, so this would be a part of the technical definition actually. And how does land which has trees or which has vegetation, how does that improve the retention of water when it rains on that land? So we know for a fact that a land which is covered with vegetation is better at retaining water compared to a land which is barren. So what are the reasons behind this? So can anybody tell me what could be the reasons behind how water is retained better in an area which is covered with vegetation?
It prevents weathering and soil erosion.
Yes, it prevents weathering and soil erosion. How does it do that?
The roots bind the soil and the top layer, so it prevents from weathering and soil erosion.
Correct. So basically, trees they keep the soil together and it prevents leaching of water, prevents fast flow of water. In the first step, when the rain falls, if a land is covered with trees, the raindrops hit the ground at a slower speed compared to how they would hit the ground if the land was barren, which is one important thing. Then some of the rains, when it gets captured in the canopy and then it flows along the tree barks, and that is called the stem flow, and they flow along the tree barks quite slowly to the ground. And then, as you mentioned, the water does not quickly flow away and there's no soil erosion. The land gets covered with water for quite some time, and this water can slowly trickle down into the underground and become and recharge the groundwater resource here. Next, it brings us to forest management. So, what is managing a forest? So basically, forest management is talking about silviculture practices and business concepts in order to best achieve the landowner's objectives. So basically, the landowner could have certain objectives, and in order to achieve them, there's a mix of silvicultural practices and business concepts that are employed, and that is what entails that is what forest management entails basically. And what are these objectives that a landowner could have? It could be either to produce large quantities of resources, for example, timber by logging of forests, or non timber forest produce, for example, fruits and medicinal plants and such things that come out of forests. It could be to get high economic returns. Could be that they want to preserve and increase the biodiversity of the area. Could be, as you mentioned, to conserve soil, or could be to retain water. So there are these different things, different objectives that a person could have who is maintaining a forest, and or an organization could have which is maintaining a forest, and they include silvicultural practices and business concepts. So what is silviculture? So anybody knows what is silviculture? If you would have watched the lectures or you have any idea already what silviculture is.
Yes, ma'am.
So what is it? Can you give a brief definition, or just like what is the concept of silviculture? Okay. So basically, silviculture, if you type silviculture in Google, it tells you that it's the growing and cultivation of trees. So it's basically the science that goes behind and the practice of basically growing and cultivating trees in a particular area. Again, this word also comes from the Latin word silva, as we discussed, which means wood. And cultivation comes from the French word culture, and basically combining them becomes silviculture, which is basically cultivation of wood. Very basic concept, and how this wood can be cultivated in order to get maximum benefits out of that particular forest land. So for the first and the second objective, which is if you want to have the maximum amount of timber, and if you want to have the maximum amount of returns from that maximum amount of plywood returns from that particular forest. So it does not necessarily mean that you will manage the forest in the same way in which you would manage it if you are trying to increase the biodiversity of the land. So, for increasing the amount of plywood, there is a certain girth of the tree at which the plywood value is the maximum. So, if you are maintaining a forest and you're doing it in order to increase your plywood returns, you would actually want to cut down the trees at this point where you have the peak girth, where you'll get the maximum income from that forest, not necessarily at the point where the girth of the trees is the maximum. Because at this particular point, after this particular point, the plywood value starts to decrease, even though the girth of the tree is increasing. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that it's not necessarily true that if the tree is the broadest, the plywood value will be the highest or the timber value will be highest. So you need to keep that in mind. Then we came up to the next chapter, which talked about classifying different forests. And um, forest growth basically depends on different factors. These are different biotic and abiotic factors. And some of these include, as you might already know, there's temperature, there's rainfall, there is what is the type of soil, what is the fertility of soil, and how which species are colonizing that particular area. So not every species is found everywhere. So for example, in India we have certain trees, and these might be native or endemic to the Indian forest. For example, if you're talking about Western Ghats, there might be many trees that are endemic to Western Ghats and are not necessarily found in, say, forests of South America or forests of Australia or the US. So it depends on which species colonizes a particular area, which gives rise to what kind of forest will be found in that area. And it also depends on interaction between different species. These could be animal or plant species, both. Okay, so in this lecture, we basically just talked about how to classify different forests. Then there is this plot which was given by R.H. Whitaker, and he plotted how different forest types are found along with different along with the range of temperature and the range of precipitation. So on the x-axis, you have average annual temperature in a particular place, and on the y-axis, you have the annual precipitation in that particular area in centimeters. So if you look at this plot, you see that in areas which have high annual temperature and which have high precipitation, mostly form a tropical rainforest, which I guess you would expect basically. In an area with high temperatures and high precipitation, you get a tropical rainforest. If you decrease the amount of precipitation in that area, but the temperature is the same, you will end up with a seasonal sort of a forest, which could be a deciduous forest, but still tropical. Now, if you decrease the temperature and you decrease the precipitation as well, you will come to a temperate seasonal forest. It's a deciduous forest, but it's found in temperate areas, not in tropical areas. Tropical areas have high temperature, temperate areas have a little lower temperature than that. Then, if you decrease the precipitation further, but you keep the temperature same, you will end up with a temperate grassland. So you will have these savanna grasslands basically, which or they can be cold deserts there. So the temperature is low and the precipitation is also quite low. And if you go to an extreme of very low temperature and very low precipitation, you will end up with a tundra kind of a ecosystem, which basically will be covered with snow most time of the year. Okay, so Whitaker came with this plot of different sorts of biomes in different temperature and precipitation regimes. Then there's this further classification. So basically, as we saw in the previous graph, there were these different biomes. And in this table, you can see with each biome what kind of a climate is that biome supports and what kind of a vegetation is found in that particular area. So, if we are talking about temperate rainforests, we'll see that they're mostly found near the equators. They're mostly always moist and they do not have much seasonality. And here you find evergreen trees. So, the evergreen trees basically are trees which don't shed their leaves at any particular season of the year. They always have leaves throughout the year. Then there are seasonal forests. As I said, seasonal forests will have deciduous kind of trees, and they'll have a summer rainy season, and the winter will mostly be a dry season. And in these forests, you'll mostly have deciduous trees which will shed their leaves in this winter dry season in order to retain moisture, in order to retain energy. But they'll have leaves in the rest of the year. Then you will have other things like the subtropical desert, which are hot deserts, and they have desert vegetation with more exposed surface. The canopy is not closed. There is more exposed surface because of patchy vegetation. Then there's woodlands or shrublands, as the term suggests. There is a lot of shrubs here, and here you see they're mostly found in the Mediterraneans. The winter is the rainy season, and the summer is the drought season, which is opposite to the tropical areas, where the summer was the rainy season and the winter was the dry season. Here you mostly find sclerophyllous trees, which are basically sclerophyllous vegetation are plants which have thick leathery leaves, and that is why they are drought adapted. They don't lose moisture as quickly. And these are also frost sensitive shrublands, so they're sensitive to frost, and the trees die out if there's a lot of frost in this area. Then there is temperate rainforest, as the term suggests. These will be found in temperate areas, and they will have a lot of rainfall. And again, you get here temperate evergreen forests, and which means that they are seasonal, but they still retain their leaves in most part of the year. Then there are temperate seasonal forests, as the term suggests. They're found in temperate areas where they're deciduous. They lose leaves in time of the year. Then there's temperate grasslands, so they don't really have a lot of tree cover, but they're mostly grassy areas. They're grasslands. Then there are boreal forests, which means that they have cool summers and they have long winters. Trees here are mostly evergreen, or there could be needle leaved trees, for example, the pine trees. And then there's tundra, which is basically the polar region, which is mostly covered with snow, and they have low evergreen vegetation. There's no trees in this area because the sun is so less that the trees cannot be supported. The growth of trees cannot be supported in such areas. Okay, so this was all about the different biomes that are found throughout the globe. Now, coming to one basic concept of what are different layers in the forest. This will help us understand what different kinds of forests are. So before we go towards what are different kinds of forests found in India, let's talk about what are the different layers in a forest. So in the forest, the lowest layer, which is the ground, is technically called the forest floor. Then one layer above that of shrubs is the shrub layer. Then if you move a little above and there are like tiny trees, they are called the understory. And then above that is the canopy, which is the most trees, which is basically covered in evergreen forest. There's like a closed canopy, and the sunlight cannot penetrate the canopy layer of most of these forests. And the emergent layer, which are trees which even go above the canopy layer in order to grasp the sunlight, because there's no sunlight that crosses the canopy. So in order for trees to get bigger, they cross the canopy layer and they become the emergent layer. So some of these trees will form the emergent layer, but the canopy will more or less be continuous. Okay. So these are the different layers of a forest, the different vertical layers or stratification. And now we come to what are the different forest types found in India. So this is a rough map which shows what different forest types are found throughout India. And you see that you get a lot of moist deciduous tropical moist deciduous vegetation in the Western Ghats and in the Himalayan foothills, Gangetic plains. You get a lot of dry deciduous vegetation in central India and in the northwestern zones of India. You get a lot of alpine, subalpine in the again in the upper parts of the Himalayas. And then you get Himalayan moist temperate forests which receive a little bit high amount of rainfall. And then you get this subtropical coniferous vegetation along the mountainous areas. But they're subtropical because they're a little above the tropical zones here, right? So, coming to each of these forests, if you talk about the tropical moist forests, they have four different types. One of which is the wet evergreen forests. As the term suggests, they are wet, which means they receive high amount of rainfalls. And as I said, evergreen means that the leaves are not shed in any particular season. Mostly, they comprise of tall trees, and they're almost entirely evergreen. And as you can already guess, they are found in Western Ghats, Andaman Nicobar Islands, and Northeast India. Some species examples would be the jamun tree, mango tree, and jackfruit trees. You, some of you who are from Kerala would know that jackfruit is a big, like is very common in these areas, because in the Western Ghats in these areas we get these wet evergreen forests. Then coming to the semi-evergreen forests, as the term suggests, they receive slightly less rainfall, but the trees are still evergreen. Mostly we have evergreen trees, but we have some deciduous trees as well. So overall, if you look at the forest, it will always have trees, but there will still be deciduous trees which are losing their vegetation at certain time during the year. But because there are still evergreen forests, the forest over evergreen trees, the forest overall will look covered with leaves. Again, they're also found in the similar regions: Western Ghats, Andaman Nicobar, and Eastern Himalayas. Then there are moist deciduous forests. As the term suggests, they receive an adequate amount of rainfall, but the dominant vegetation is deciduous. And the canopy is even and dense, and the height reaches around 25 meters. We found it in most of India. So, most of India is covered with deciduous forests, except for western and northwestern regions. Species here mostly include teak, sal, mango, bamboo, and rosewood. Then there's the last kind of tropical moist forest, which is the mangroves, the littoral or the swamp forests. They basically are evergreen trees with varying density and height, and they're associated with wetness, which means they're found near the oceans and river banks. Again, as you might have guessed, they're found in Andaman Nicobar Islands, along the seashores, and in the river deltas. About mangroves, one thing which is very interesting is that they have pneumatophores, which you might have studied in high school. But in mangrove trees, because the water is because the roots go under the water and it's so salty that some of the roots grow above, like they have appendages which go above the water surface, and they have these pneumatophores, which are slight pores through which the air enters um the tree and helps in the photosynthesis and respiration basically of the tree system. And vivipary is an interesting phenomena which is found in mangroves because they grow in these swamps or in water. What they do is that the flower becomes into a fruit, and the fruit matures into a seedling or a propagule on the tree itself, and then it falls down when there's a low tide in the area, when the water levels are low. That is when the seed falls down so that it's able to reach the ground and develop into the next tree. This is an image in which you can see how the propagules look like. So basically, in order for the next seedlings to reach ground, so the propagule matures in the tree itself, and then it falls down when the tide is low so that it's able to reach the ground. Otherwise, it'll get swept away by the water in the area. So these are two interesting characteristics about mangroves. Moving on to the tropical dry forests, we find, as the term suggests, they're found in the tropical areas which have high temperatures, and dry means they have relatively less rainfall compared to the tropical moist forests. So, what we find here are dry evergreen forests. Basically, as you might already guess, they are drier, the rainfall is low, but they're evergreen. They don't lose their leaves at any time during the year. They have hard leaved evergreen vegetation. Emergent layer is deciduous, but the canopy is mostly evergreen trees, and they are less than 20 meters high. They're found in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, and some species include ironwood, black plum, and Ceylon ebony. Then there's dry deciduous. As the term suggests, they're nearly deciduous. They will lose their leaves in the dry season in order to prevent water loss and to save energy. They're found in MP, Gujarat, in Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. And then there are thorny scrubs, which basically include deciduous and low thorny trees, mostly xerophytes, and the canopy is quite broken because it's a patchy distribution of trees. They're mostly found in North, West, Central, and South India, and some species are spurge and cactus. Next, what was discussed were montane subtropical forests, which means the forests that are found in the mountains but away from the tropical zones, a little further from the equator. So these include broad-leaved forests, which have broad-leaved evergreen trees, and they're found in Himalayas and Western Ghats. And the species include oak, chestnut, birch, cherry, bamboo. Then there's pine forests, which are again found, as you might be aware, pine trees are coniferous trees. They have thin needle-like leaves. They're found in areas like the Shivalik Hills, in the Himalayas, in the Khasi Naga Hills, and the species include sal, amla, pine, char. And then there's the dry evergreen trees. which basically again have low xerophytic forests and scrubs. They're still found in the Shivalik and the Himalayan foothills, and they include species like olive. So this is all about the mountain subtropical forests. And the next are mountain temperate forests. Again, these are forests found in the mountainous regions, but even further from the subtropical forests in the temperate zone now. They have wet, moist, and dry types. Wet mountain forests have received excessive rainfall. Moist ones receive an adequate but a lower amount of rainfall, and dry mountain forests receive an even lesser amount of rainfall. As you would expect, the wet mountain forests have evergreen trees. The moist ones have sclerophyllous and coniferous trees, and the dry ones have more xerophytic undergrowth, so they survive drier conditions. And in regions, wet forests are found in Nilgiris and eastern Himalayas, which receive a high amount of rainfall. Moist ones are found in western and eastern Himalayas, and the drier ones are found even further north in Lahaul and Kinnaur. And the species in the wet mountain forests include oak and rhododendron. In the moist one, still oak and rhododendron are present, but you'll get walnuts, bamboo, and ferns. And in the dry ones, you'll get oak, maple, ash, juniper, chilgoza, these kinds of trees. Then you come towards the subalpine forests, which basically are characterized by very cold temperatures, low sunlight, which leads to a low amount of energy because sunlight is low, which means that the temperature will get lower, and the height that the forest achieves is also again low. So the general composition is that there are stunted trees, and they usually have a close formation, which means that the canopy is quite dense, but they do not have a lot of. They can be with or without coniferous trees. And the regions include Kashmir and the Himalayan forests from Kashmir towards Arunachal Pradesh. So the entire belt of the Himalayas. And these include fir, birch, rhododendron, and larch, these kinds of trees. Alpine forests are like the subalpine, they're very cold, they have even less amount of sunlight and even lower growth. They can be moist or dry. If they are moist means they receive some amount of rainfall. If they're dry means they receive very little rainfall. And the moist forests have some kind of evergreen scrubs and low height trees. Dry ones, as you might expect, have xerophytic scrubs with a patchy distribution. The regions include, for the moist forests, Himalayas and Myanmar border. Dry ones are found in higher altitudes of Himalayas from 3,000 to 4,900 meters. And the species you can see here are rhododendron, birch, moss, and ferns. And for the dry forests, it's juniper and willow. So, to keep in mind are two different things. There's alpine meadows, which basically have very low height shrubs, mostly grasslands, and that is because they receive high wind speeds, and tall trees cannot survive in this high wind speeds. And the alpine forests have mostly they do have trees and they have grasses, but they also have coniferous trees. So there's a difference between meadows and forests. Next, you come to the last lecture of this week, which talks about the value of forests. How do you associate or how do you assign value to your forest land? So, there are different ways in which you can do this. So, there's a way to have a total economic value, which is comprised of the use value and the non use value. So, basically, the total economic value can either come from the value arising from using the resource, or the value which is arising even though you're not using the resource. Even though the resource is not being used, there's still some value to it. So the total economic value comprises of both these. And further, the use value can be split up into direct value, indirect value, or optional value. And the non-use value can be further divided into existence value, altruistic value, or bequest value. Okay. And so, coming to the use value, there is a direct value, um, which you can guess, I guess, basically comes from directly using the forest either in consumptive or non consumptive manners. So, can somebody tell me what is the consumptive manner of using a forest and what is a non consumptive manner? Any guesses? Consumptive, basically, the term suggests itself. So, anybody would like to take a guess on what is a consumptive versus a non consumptive way of using a resource?
If a resource is used by one person, then the other another person won't be able to use it. It will be consumed totally. That would come under the consumptive, I guess.
Yeah, that is correct. And can you give me an example?
Like for example, if I use the timber plant, the whole log, if I use it, then if another person comes to use it, he won't be able to use it because I have already harvested it. I've already consumed it.
Yeah, very nice. So basically, as Anjali said, in the consumptive manner, if you're using a resource, you're basically depleting the resources, and the next person who might want to use the resource will not be able to get the same amount of resource. And we're talking about non-consumptive usage. It's that even if you get a benefit out of that resource, it's still not affected, and the another person can come and still use the resource. So, in the forest example, in consumptive, if you're collecting, say, timber or fruits or medicines out of the medicinal plants out of the forest, that reduces the availability of the resource for the next person who might want to use it. So, that's a consumptive way of using the forest. Non-consumptive manner includes things like ecotourism. If one of us goes to the jungle and looks at the birds and the plants um, and the animals there, it does not hamper the next person's ecotourism. They can still go and enjoy all of these things because you are not like consuming them. Another way of consumptive would be if we talk about animals, if somebody is going and hunting out the animals, that will decrease the amount of resource for the next person who might want to go and hunt or not hunt, just look at these things. But a non consumptive manner would be in which you are not harming or not doing anything to the resource, but you're just using it. Could be for education, could be for research, could be just for recreation. That's a direct use of the forest. An indirect use of the forest would be when you're talking about when you're deriving services from the forest. For example, we are getting different benefits like watershed benefits. As I said, basically, if you have a forested land, you'll have a higher amount of water retention in that particular area. So these are watershed benefits which we derive from a forest, which are indirect. We're not directly using the forest, we're using the water that is being accumulated by the forest. And there are some ecosystem services, basically, like maintaining these nitrogen fixation cycles or carbon cycle, water cycle, these things which are all affected by the forest. They all benefit us, but we're not directly using the forest in any of these. And there are evolutionary processes. We get a lot of biodiversity in forests. So that is another way of how forests have their own value. And the last thing is having an option. So basically, a way of retaining an option for gaining a benefit which could either be direct or indirect in the future. So you're keeping aside this land as a forest because in the future you might be able to use it either for its direct benefit or for its indirect benefit. So having that option is a way of having an option value. So these are the three values which come under the use value. Second is the non-use value, and it can further be divided into three categories: existence value, the mm, happiness or the general uh, okay, yeah, the happiness that you're deriving from the knowledge that there exists a forest. For example, if you're a citizen of India, you know that, oh, India has so much amount of land covered by forests, and you are happy about that fact, or you are joyful that, yeah, okay, our country has so much amount of land. So that's basically existence value of the forest, that okay, yeah, the forest exists simply because the forest is there, or simply because there are animals in that forest. Say example, we have exotic species, you have endemic species. Simply because they exist, we are happy. Second thing is altruistic value. You That is the value basically of, say for example, one of you or us knowing that okay, somebody else is using the forest. If not me, somebody else, somebody living closer to the forest might be using the forest, and that is why I don't want to destroy this forest, or I don't want to do anything to the forest. So that's another non-use value. I am not directly using the forest, but somebody in my generation might be using the forest. So that is why, and that the knowledge of the fact that somebody is using the forest is basically an altruistic value. Bequest value is a way in which we talk about that we want to leave a better planet for the next generations to come. So that's basically the bequest value, that we want to leave behind resources for the future generation. So that's how that is another non-use value of the forests. Okay, so this is what different values the forest has. And how do we measure the value of the forest? So there are different ways in which we can measure the value of the forests. So how do you do that? How do you put a price to how important a forest is, or why should it not be replaced by other things? So one of them, there are different approaches for valuation. One of them is the market price approach, or what is the revealed willingness to pay. How much is somebody willing to pay? One of them is market pricing. For example, you have a certain forest land, and it gives you certain amounts of what do you call it? It gives you resources, as we discussed. For example, it gives you timber, which is worth a certain amount of money. It gives you non timber forest produce, again, like fruits or medicinal plants or something, which again give you certain more amount of money. For example, say timber is giving you some 5 lakhs per annum, non-timber forest produces giving you some 2 lakhs per annum, and say there is ecotourism happening in your forest, people are coming and visiting your forest, and they're paying you certain amount of money for that. You're ticketing maybe visits to your forests, and from that you're getting say some 7 lakhs of money. So in total you're getting 14 lakhs per annum from your forest land. So that is the market price. If somebody offers to buy your land, you would obviously sell it for something worth much more. You will be like, okay, I'm getting 14 lakhs per annum. How much can you pay it so that it compensates for all that amount for this land which is covered with forest? So that's basically market pricing. There is hedonic pricing, which comes from how happy are people living around that area. So very basic example which was given in the lectures is, say you have two areas, one is covered with industries and pollution and the other one is covered with forests. So what will be the price of living in these two areas? So if there is a similar building in both these areas, you will see that area which is more serene, which is surrounded by forests, the cost of the flats there will be much higher compared to the flats in a building which is close to an industrial area. So that is hedonic pricing, basically the difference in the amount that somebody is willing to pay to live in an area close to a forest. So that's again a willingness to pay. I'm willing to pay this much amount of money. I'm willing to pay say 10 lakhs more for a flat if I'm getting it closer to the forest area. That's hedonic pricing. Third is the travel cost. As the term suggests, how much is somebody willing to spend on travel to come visit a forest? So that's the travel cost. For example, somebody is living in Punjab, how much are they willing to spend to go visit a forest in Himachal Pradesh? So that will be the travel cost, and that much amount of money can be assigned as a value to that forest, because different people are spending different amounts of money to go see that forest and enjoy its biodiversity, right? So these are different ways in which you give a market price to the forest. Then there is circumstantial evidence or assigned willingness to pay. That basically means what would be the replacement cost for the forest. For example, if the forest, as I said, is acting as a watershed, or it's harvesting rainwater, or it's acting as a sewage treatment. For example, everybody is discharging their sewage towards the forest, and then basically because of the so many plants, that sewage water gets treated and gets converted into a better quality water. So how much money would it rather take you to actually put a sewage plant there, or actually start rainwater harvesting without forest being there, and have the same amount of water being harvested or the same amount of water being treated? So what is the replacement cost of this forest, of the services that the forest is providing you? Then there's damage cost. What would be the damage that is caused by the absence of the forest in that particular area? For example, if you have a very well forested area, and if you have, for example, somebody is living in a rural area and it's very well forested, and somebody is living in a more city area which has more traffic, which has more pollution, then government is would be paying some amount of money to treat people in the city area which are suffering from, say, diseases caused by this smoke, caused by this pollution, but would not be paying the same amount of money in the village area where people are breathing much cleaner air. So that difference in the amount of money that the government is investing in treating people, in treating patients in the non forested area, because of something which can be prevented by a forest being there is basically the damage cost that's being covered, right? Or for example, say you have a forested area, and if you cut down the forest, then that area which will receive a lot of rainfall, and because of a lot of rainfall, it might lead to flooding of that area. Then what is the damage that will be caused by those floods, and which can be prevented by having a forest in that area? So that's basically again a damage cost, which would have to be paid if the forest is not there. Then the third last way of putting a price to the forest would be to conduct a survey and to ask people how much are they willing to pay for that particular forested area. This is called a contingent value evaluation. Basically, you go around and you conduct a survey and you ask people how much money are they willing to pay for this particular forest. It could be asking people, okay, how much money are you people living in different parts of India, you could ask them, okay, how much money are you willing to pay to save the Western Ghats? How much money are you willing to pay to save the patch, the forest patch next to your city? So there's different ways in which you could conduct the survey,
Hallelujah.
and this will give you a certain idea of how valuable this forest is to the local people. For example, say a builder comes and says that I want to buy this land and cut up the forest and make a mall in this area. So are the local people trying to protect the forest? Are they willing to pay certain amount of money to prevent this from happening and helping the government maintain that particular forest area? Or are people like, yeah, that's okay. I mean, you can cut up the forest. We don't really care for it much. So that is the how you can assign a value to the forest. So these were the different concepts that were covered during this week. If anybody has any doubts, you can ask me. You can either type it out in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask me your doubts. And after this, we'll move on to the
Nothing.
quiz for the for this tutorial. So anybody has any doubts with any of the definitions, any of the classification, or how these different valuations are functioning? Okay, so I guess most of this is clear to people because yeah, they're very basic concepts. So nice that
Yeah,
they're
can you give an example?
yeah. For what?
Yeah. Is there any real example regarding valuation of the forest, a real life case or something like that? For example, probably
For a real life case
maybe
study.
a hedonic price. Yeah,
Okay,
maybe a hedonic pricing or yeah.
so okay, I've not really gone towards studying these real life examples. That's a good point out that I should have made. But a very simple example would be, for example, if you're going for you're visiting some place. For example, you're visiting the Western Ghats, say you're visiting Chikmagalur or Coorg or Kunur, Uti, any of these places, if you are taking a resort or taking a hotel which is close to the forested area, which has a nice view of the forests, the room there, which you will get, will be much more, can be priced at a higher price compared to a room which you will get closer to the say the area which has closer to the highway or closer to the trafficy area or the city area. And that is one way of thinking about hedonic pricing. For example, these days a lot of nature resorts, a lot of nature stay outs, staycations are coming up. So that's a way of hedonic pricing, I would say. Basically, if I'm trying to go and get a hotel close to the forest, it'll be much more expensive compared to a hotel close to the city area because people are looking for serene surroundings. Does that answer your question? Like a very basic example I'm giving.
Yeah, that clears it out. Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, coming to the quiz. So the first question for the quiz is, which of these is a non-consumptive, is not a consumptive value? You can type it in the chat box or you can unmute and say the answer. Timber, firewood,
Education.
non-timber.
Education.
Okay, yeah, thank you. The correct answer is education. Very good. I don't think this needs an explanation. Basically, timber, firewood, non timber, all of these things can be consumed and they will reduce or they can be depleted. Education cannot. Okay. Which of these is not a forest type found in India? Mediterranean dry, tropical dry, mountain temperate, or alpine?
Mediterranean.
Mediterranean dry.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, very simple question. Mediterranean dry is not found in India because it will be found in the Mediterranean regions. Tropical moist forests do not include broadleaf forests, wet evergreen forests, semi evergreen forests, or moist deciduous forests.
Broadleaf forest.
Broad-leaved forest.
Yeah, you guys are correct. Broadleaf forests are not present in tropical moist forests. We just went through the classification. The value of leaving use and non use resources for offsprings or future generations is called altruistic, bequest, existence, or option value.
Bequest value.
Biggest value.
Correct. So it's called bequest value. As we discussed, basically, leaving it for the future generations is bequest value. The term forest originates from Latin forest, Greek forest, Latin
Latin
forest meaning trees, Greek forest meaning trees.
Latin forest meaning outside. First one.
Yes, option A, Latin forest meaning outside. Forest basically means outside, silva means wood, wood that is outside. Great. Sorry for that question 15. Anyway, which statement best captures the economic rationale for forest conservation presented in the lecture? Forests have cultural importance. Forests are aesthetically pleasing. Long term total value often exceeds short term extraction benefits. Forests cannot be valued monetarily. So, which of the statement best captures the economic rationale for conservation? So, it's a
Number
little bit
C, long-term
of
value exceed short-term.
yes. Basically, long term total value often exceeds the short term extraction benefits. As I was giving you an example of market price value, if your forest is giving you some 20, 30 lakhs rupees per annum, that will obviously exceed how much money somebody or some builder would want to pay you for that land, right? So, long term value will exceed the short term extraction benefits. Correct. Next question. A community protects a forest today so that it can be used in the future, even though they do not currently exploit it.
Op-
This is best
Option
described as direct,
option
indirect,
value.
option. Yeah, option value. So they want to have the option of using that forest in the future someday, even though they do not want to use it right now, directly or indirectly. So that's an option value. Very good. Which of the following would reduce the use value of a forest for others? One person studying plant taxonomy, multiple tourists visiting, person extracting all available amla fruits, or students conducting bird surveys.
C. Number C.
Yeah. Option C, if a person is extracting all the available fruits, then of course it's going to reduce the value for the others. Two people independently photograph the same tiger in different days. This demonstrates that wildlife tourism is consumptive, non use, non consumptive, or indirect.
Indirect use.
Non-consumptive.
Yeah. It's basically a non consumptive use. It would not be indirect because you're directly going to the forest and like photographing the tiger. So
Yeah.
it's a non consumptive use. Total economic value of the forest is composed of direct, indirect, use, non use, consumptive, non consumptive, market or ecological value.
Direct,
Market
user and
value.
non-user.
So one of you is correct. It's use and non use value. So, yeah, one that in which you're using it and one in which you're not using it. Stunted vegetation in subalpine forests is due to human disturbance, low fertility, reduced sunlight and low temperatures, or excess rainfall.
Reduce sunlight and low temperature.
Reduce
Yeah,
sunlight and low temperature.
because the sunlight is low, so there's not enough biomass available for trees to grow taller. Which forest type is most strongly associated with xerophytes and broken canopy? Alpine moist, thorn, pine, mountain wet.
Alpine. Alpine moist.
You're saying alpine moist.
Xerophytes.
Anybody else would like to take a guess?
Mountain wet forest.
Mountain wet. Okay. Okay. Anybody else would like to take a guess?
Thorn forest.
Non
Uh,
forest.
the
Yeah, so the correct answer would be thorn forest. Why would it not be alpine moist and montane wet? First of all, the terms would suggest you it's a moist forest means there is rainfall.
Not
So
sure.
you would not require
Mm.
xerophytes there. And
Yeah.
again, montane wet would also have rainfall, so you would not require xerophytes there. So it'll be a thorn forest. Very good. The primary reason deciduous species shed their leaves is to avoid herbivory, because if no leaves, nobody can eat them, increase growth rate, conserve moisture or energy, or enhance reproduction.
Conserve
Conserve moisture.
moisture and energy.
Correct. Very good. So basically, to conserve the moisture and to conserve energy. An area with high temperature and high rainfall is most likely to support which of these
Tropical
forests?
Tropical
rainforest.
Tropical
Tropical
rainforest.
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 Tropical
Very good.
rainforest.
It's a tropical rainforest. Very nice. Leaving deadwood in a forest is most strongly associated with which management objective? So, if you're leaving deadwood in your forest, which of these management objectives are you
Soil.
fulfilling? Timber production,
Soil
Can be both
conservation.
actually. Soil
soil
and water.
conservation, wildlife preservation, or
Soil
water retention?
conservation.
Okay,
It can be both soil and water.
Soil conservation.
can be water, soil. Anybody else?
Soil converse.
Yes, you. Anybody else would like to take a guess at this? There is one of you is saying soil, one of you is saying water, and both.
Soil
Both.
Timber
conversation.
production.
Okay, so according to me, the answer of this could include soil conservation and wildlife preservation. Water retention, I am not so sure. But yeah, these two, yeah, now that I think about it, the soil will get a little bit more humus added to it if
Yeah.
the dead wood is left there. And wildlife preservation, because a lot of termites and beetles would feed onto the dead wood, and a lot of plants will further eat onto the termites, which will help the food cycle. So that's how the wildlife will get preserved. Water retention, I'm not so sure. I don't think so, because even if you don't leave the deadwood there, the other trees would still be helping with water retention. So I don't know how that is adding up, but yeah. Then next question is, okay, so there's a forest manager who is aiming to maximize economic returns from plywood production. So what should he be primarily focusing on? Maximizing the total biomass, harvesting trees at peak girth value, allowing the trees to reach maximum age, or maintaining deadwood.
Option
Harvesting
B.
trees at peak growth value.
Maximizing total biomass value.
Okay.
A
Somebody is saying
option, ma'am.
maximizing total biomass. Somebody is saying harvesting at peak girth value. Anybody else? Any other guess?
I'm maintaining deadwood.
Maintaining deadwood. Okay. So there's a forest manager who is aiming to maximize economic returns from plywood production. So what should he be focusing on?
Yeah. Here, total biomass, maximizing total biomass.
Total
Option
biomass.
A.
Okay. So there are three answers right now. But the correct answer to this is basically harvesting trees at peak girth value, as I showed you in that plot, in which there's plywood, uh, and then there's plywood value, and then there's girth on the x-axis, and then you see a normal kind of a distribution, and the plywood value is maximum when the girth is not maximum, but it's the peak value. So at one particular girth of the tree, the value of the plywood is maximum. But if you increase the more biomass you increase, the more girth that increases. That does not really improve the quality of plywood. It actually goes down. Okay,
The op-
so it's basically
yeah. The option could
harvesting.
actually include optimal girth, basically.
Yeah, so harvesting the trees at the optimal or the peak girth value. Okay. Next question. There's a scrub forest in Rajasthan with scattered thorny trees, and it fails to meet the ecological definition of a forest. Why? Is it because it is located outside city limits? It lacks animal diversity? It does not have a closed canopy? Or is because it's not legally notified? Thank you.
Does not have a close canopy.
Yeah. So the correct answer is because it does not have a closed canopy. Very good. Next question is the FAO definition of forests differs from the legal definition of forests. Why? Because it focuses only on ownership, because it requires notification under forest law, because it emphasizes vegetative associations and ecological functions, or because it excludes forest used for production. How does the FAO
Option
definition?
C.
Emphasizes vegetative associations.
Yes, very nice, because it emphasizes the vegetative associations and the ecological functions. Next question. Which of the following situations best illustrates the difference between a forest and a forest land? A mangrove forest which is being used for ecotourism, reserved forest with a dense canopy, revenue forest recorded in government records currently without trees, or a peak plantation of teak, a private plantation of teak, sorry. So which
Option C.
C
situation?
option, a revenue
Yeah,
forest.
C.
Yeah. So basically, a revenue forest which is recorded in government records is still forest land even if it is without trees. Next question is an area inside a village has dense tree cover, undergrowth, birds, insects, and fungi, primarily used for agriculture, has never been notified under any forest law. According to the Supreme Court's interpretation, would this area be classified as forest, forest land, non forest land, or protected forest?
Forest.
Forest land.
Forest land.
Forest.
Okay, can people giving
Forest.
forest and forest land give me their explanations? Why is it forest and why is it forest land?
Then because it is not under forest law, so basically the government would not take the revenue from this land.
So
And the
then it
Supreme Court considers the dictionary
Therefore, it's a
definition
forest.
as the correct definition of forest. So it will be it will come under forest land.
so will it come under forest or forest land?
Forest.
Forest.
Yeah, so your explanation was correct.
Forest.
So basically, because Supreme Court considers the definition, dictionary definition of forest, so this basically comes under uh,
Forest.
forest, right? So one second, yeah, and that is all for today. Thank you for attending the tutorial. If anybody has any doubts, I'm here. You can ask me any doubts if you have, and people who don't have any doubts can leave the meeting. But anybody
I
who has
wanted
any
to ask,
doubts, yeah, go on.
when we receive the certificate, do we get an internship also if we have a high score?
Internship with NPTEL?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I don't think so. NPTEL
If we
offers
have a high
internships.
score,
So,
oh,
because this
I
is a
saw on
course,
it was there.
you saw on what?
I saw it on Google actually that they provide internship if someone has a high score in the certificate. That's why I was asking.
Okay, I'm actually not aware of this. You can maybe write to the FAQ section or to the NPTEL organizers. I am not aware because yeah, I think this is a course which will give you a certification. I'm not so sure about like what sort of an internship. Like that certificate can be used to get an internship, but NPTEL itself offering internships, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Ma'am, were these
Can we get
questions that you discussed in class only from the assignment, or were there also questions like apart from the assignment?
In this tutorial.
Yes, ma'am.
So I am technically not discussing the questions that are given in the quiz right now. I'm so this is basically a short quiz that I created on my own. So yeah, some of these are like some older questions, but others are just where I came up with.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Yeah,
one more question? Can we get the slides? Because it's very easy to refer back to some important topics that we have missed.
yeah,
So can we get
definitely.
the slides?
These slides will be shared with you. There'll be a Google folder link will
Okay.
be which will be given to you, and you can
Huh.
access all of these slides.
And also to the lectures. Lectures only has the video. It's very difficult to refer back to the videos if we are for any important topics.
Oh,
So
so
if we can
the
get the
slides
both,
of the lecture video.
yeah, size of the lecture and this too.
Okay. For the lecture, I will check. I'm not sure, but for this,
Mm.
definitely you'll get the slides.
Mm. Google
Um,
link,
Yes,
Google
you'll
Drive
get a
link.
drive link. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Also, ma'am, is there somewhere where we can access the previous year questions of this, like of this whole topic, like forest and the management, the entire course?
I don't think so. I mean, NPTEL does not really release the previous year questions, but if there's somewhere you can Google and find out, maybe you can get them. But otherwise, yeah, otherwise, I don't think NPTEL itself releases the previous year questions. They just give you new quizzes, and I think those quizzes will be helpful for you in the final exam as well.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Sure.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
can you please brief out the scope of this course, forest and management?
Can I do what about the scope?
Yes, for future use with the certificate, what can we do with this little course like forest and management?
Okay, yeah. Oh, it also depends on what you're doing right now. If somebody is doing, say, a forestry degree or a zoology or a biology, life sciences related degree, I think this will be helpful for them to understand forests and a little bit about their ecology and their management. If somebody, it's also useful for people who might be aspiring to give one of these UPSC exams for forests, I guess, because if you are trying to work for forest management, it will be important to understand what forests are present in India and how they are maintained and what are different management practices. If you're simply doing it to get course credits, I think that is also okay, because yeah, it'll if your college takes or accepts NPTEL scores, then that will be helpful in that sense. Otherwise, yeah, in the future it'll help you if you're trying to pursue forestry, or you're trying to do ecology in any sense, or animal behavior, things like that. I think it's a useful course to understand how forests are managed. So it depends on what you're doing right now and what you plan to do.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure. Anybody else has any questions? If people don't have questions, they can exit the meeting. Thank you. And if anybody has any doubt, you can either ask off or you can write in the chat box.
Ma'am,
Yeah. Hello, somebody was saying something.
Hello.
Okay, if nobody has any further doubts, I will end this meeting. Thank you so much for attending this lecture.
Hello.
Yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
Ma'am, no doubt, ma'am.
Okay, yeah. So you can exit the meeting if people don't have any doubts.
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for attending. Thank you so much. See you
Okay,
next
ma'am.
week.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.